The more I study, the more irresistible do I feel my genius to be. I do not believe my father ever was, or ever could have been, such a poet as I shall be an analyst, wrote the 28-year-old Augusta Ada King, Countess of Lovelace, commonly known as Ada Lovelace, born in London, December 10, 1815, the only issue of the brief and tempestuous marriage between the poet George Gordon Byron, better known as Lord Byron, and Annabel Milbank. Don't worry, the rest of the sentences are going to be shorter. A few months after her birth, her parents separated. Presumably the last straw in the strained relationship was Byron's alleged incestuous affair with his half-sister, the Augusta of several of his poems. The shabby details of this liaison were made public by Harriet Beecher Stowe, she of Uncle Tom's Cabin fame, to whom Lady Byron had entrusted them. It's not clear whether this slip was planned by Lady B to embarrass the poet, or whether Mrs. Stowe reached a confidence. There are adherents to both theories. Lord Byron then departed for the continent, never again to see his homeland or his daughter. But he would never erase Ada from his memory, and the famous epic Childe Harold's Pilgrimage testifies to this anguish. Is thy face like thy mother's, my fair child? Ada, sole daughter of my house and heart. When I last saw the young blue eyes, they smiled, and then we parted, not as now we part, but with hope. Ada was born into a world of privilege and creativity. However, she was reared in virtual ignorance of her father's works, as Lady Byron was determined to shield Ada from the influence of her notorious father. She showed little signs of having inherited her father's creative artistry, although she was a fair musician. Instead, excelled in her mother's strong point, mathematics. Concerned about the influence of Byron's erratic behavior, Annabel raised her with an emphasis on rigorous education and intellectual pursuits. Under her mother's guidance, Ada's education focused heavily on mathematics and science, disciplines that were traditionally reserved for men. She showed a remarkable aptitude for these subjects from a young age, demonstrating a talent for analytical thinking and problem solving. Her mother hoped that this education would shield her from any inherited traits of her father's temperament. Ada's early education was overseen by her mother, who hired tutors to teach her subjects like mathematics, science, and languages. Ada showed exceptional aptitude in mathematics from a young age, displaying a remarkable ability to grasp complex concepts. However, alongside her academic pursuits, Ada also developed interests in various other fields, including music, literature, and science. An early interest in things mechanical also appeared in the factory tours that were a source of real enjoyment in her youth. By 18, she was regularly attending public lectures at the Mechanics Institute. Her opportunity came when she met Charles Babbage, the renowned mathematician who would become her friend and mentor. On June 5th, 1833, she attended a flamboyant party brimming with London socialites, to whom she was making her debut at the age of 17. There was Babbage, a widower in his 40s, who spoke excitedly of an invention called the difference machine, a tower of numbered wheels that could make reliable calculations with the turn of a handle. A few days later, Lady Byron took Ada to his home to see him demonstrate the device in his drawing room. Ada, intrigued by the incomplete prototype, struck up a correspondence with Babbage about his potential in her own mathematical studies. The letters between them spanned from June 10th, 1835 to August 12th, 1852. He told her about his plans. She wrote to him of her ambition. I think your taste for mathematics is so decided that it ought not to be checked, Babbage wrote to her in 1839. We are now aware that the basic anatomy of the digital computer was laid out, not as previously thought, during a technical binge attending World War II, but 100 years earlier by the crusty Englishman Charles Babbage. His life and contributions have been well documented. His sickly and secluded childhood. In 1812, the outline of the difference engine first came to him. The later construction of what engineers today would call the data flow model of it, under a grant from the British government, his inspiration from the Jacquard loom for general purpose calculating machine operating from punched cards and anticipating many key elements of modern computer design. The expansion of this notion to the description of the analytic engine, and his bitter disappointment when the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Robert Peel, declined to support the construction of the analytic engine from government coffers on the ground that Babbage had never fully delivered on his commitment for the difference engine and therefore could not be entrusted with further largesse from public sources. We also know that although Babbage's designs are basically sound, the manufacturing technology of the day was incapable of meeting his exacting specifications, so that the inventor never lived to produce working models. The cantankerous Babbage, forever battling his scientific colleagues on one score or another, when he wasn't badgering organ grinders, the bane of his later years, was nonetheless something of a social gadabout, who could be most charming when the mood struck him. He once wrote he had no less than 13 invitations to dinner for every day of the month, Sundays included. And he was on intimate terms with a startling number of the important personalities of the day. His glittering Saturday scientific soirees were attended by the social and intellectual elite of London. Babbage's principal interpreter, the one person perhaps most responsible for his place in the history of computation, was a woman, Augusta Ada King, the Countess of Lovelace, who was approximately the same age as his own daughter would have been had she lived. What is perhaps less known is a fascinating course of collaboration between the young Countess and the middle-aged inventor, and its tragic outcome. A biographical sketch by the editor of the Examiner said of her that she was thoroughly original, possessed of genius, not poetic, but rather mathematical and metaphysical, her mind having been in a constant practice of investigation. And in the passage, as few editors who chance today, with an understanding thoroughly masculine in solidity, grasp, and firmness, Lady Lovelace had all the delicacies of the most refined female character. The superficial observer would have never observed the strength and knowledge that lay hidden under the womanly graces. Babbage had known Lady Byron well for some time, and she and Ada were frequent guests in his home. Among other guests on these occasions were Professor and Mrs. Augustus de Morgan. Dr. de Morgan is remembered by computer professionals for the theorem that bears his name, to the effect that negation of conjunctions is logically equivalent to the disjunction of negations and vice versa. Greek to me. Mrs. de Morgan said of Ada during this period, while the rest of the party gazed at the beautiful instrument, the difference engine, with the same sort of expression and feeling as some savages are said to have on first seeing a looking glass, Miss Byron, as young as she was, understood its working and saw the great beauty of the invention. Professor de Morgan himself wrote privately to Lady Byron that Ada's mathematical ability was perhaps a first-rate eminence, but with masculine condescension, he feared that the very great tension of mind required for advanced mathematical work was beyond the strength of women's physical powers, and therefore declined to encourage her. Babbage, accustomed to indifference and uninformed skepticism from his countrymen, even to some who might have known better, reacted instinctively to Ada's display of intelligent understanding and appreciation, the more so since it came from what must have been to him a totally unexpected source. Over the course of time, he took to calling her his Lady Fairy, and it is not unlikely he appeared to the girl as something of a father figure. In 1835, at age 20, Augusta Ada married William, 8th Baron King, who 3 years later became the first Earl of Lovelace. He was a jovial, kind, and tolerant of his wife's aberrations, but he was not her intellectual equal. From the start, Babbage was a frequent visitor at the baronial estate, Ockham Park, and between visits, an intense and curious correspondence developed between Charles and Ada. After one unusually long separation, Ada wrote, "I'm very anxious to talk to you. I will give you a hint on what. It strikes me that at some future time, my head may be made subservient to your purposes and plans. If so, if ever I could be worthy or capable of being used by you, my head would be yours. I scarcely dare exalt myself to hope that even humbly, that I can ever be intellectually worthy to serve you." But it turned out the other way around. Ada wound up using Babbage. Meanwhile, she prepared herself for the one great service she really did for her friend by undertaking an intensive study of advanced mathematics. Like so many engineers, Babbage was notoriously delinquent in documenting his ideas, and this did nothing to enhance his standing with his sponsors or in the technical community. Once, on a vacation to Italy, he had met a soldier and mathematician, Count Luigi Menabrea. He was fascinated with the concepts embodied in the analytic engine, that's the extension of the difference engine, and undertook to write a full description of it. When Menabrea's paper appeared in 1842, Ada undertook to translate it into English. With the inventor's encouragement, she added many detailed notes, so that the final version turned out to be 3 times as long as the French original. One of the notes, an example of how the machine might be applied, was a step-by-step description of how it might be scheduled to compute Bernoulli's numbers. Ada thus qualifies for the title of the world's first computer programmer. Babbage wrote to her, "These memoirs, taken together, furnish to those capable of understanding the reasoning a complete demonstration that the whole development and operation of analysis are now capable of being executed by machinery." Ada's translation remains the only satisfactory description we have today of the analytic engine. During the course of the translation, the correspondence between the two collaborators intensified. The portions of it that have survived yield a graphic portrayal of the gradual metamorphosis of the ambitious young woman from an awed and humble hero worshipper to a domineering schemer. She wrote in June 1843, "I'm more determined than ever in my future plans. I think much of the possible, I believe I may say probable, future connection between us." And as her contributions multiplied, not only to the documentation of the analytic engine, but also on occasion to improvements in its basic design, Ada's humility began to evaporate, to be replaced by forwardness, yielding to an arrogance and argumentativeness at some point, and childish petulance, bordering on flirtation at others. "I am very much annoyed at your having altered my note. I'm always willing to make the required alteration myself, but cannot endure another person to muddle with my sentences." Babbage, startled by the changing tone, replied, "If you are as fastidious about the actions of your friends as you are of those of your pen, I much fear that I shall equally lose your friendship and your notes. There's still one trifling misapprehension about the variable cards. The variable card can never be directed to order more than one variable to begin keeping off at once, because the mill could not receive them." "I cannot imagine what you mean about the variable cards," she retorted, "since I have never supposed in my own mind that one variable card could involve more than one variable at a time, nor have I ever expressed such an idea in any passage whatsoever. The fact is, that if my own exposition had been strictly followed, this confusion would not have occurred. I've always fancied that you were a harum-scarum and inaccurate now and then. I wish that you were as accurate, as much to be relied on, as myself. Soon her letters began to make frequent mention of her deteriorating health. I can scarcely describe to you how very ill and harassed I felt yesterday. They also seemed to be a warning of impending psychotic tendencies. She wrote to him in July 1843, "This brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show, if my breathing and some other etc. do not make too rapid a progress towards instead of from mortality. Before 10 years are over, the devil's in it if I haven't sucked some of the lifeblood from the mysteries of this universe in a way that no mortal lip or brain could do. No one knows what awful energy and power yet lie undeveloped in that vibrating frame of mine. Signed, yours fairly forever, A. L." And 2 days later, the more I study, the more irresistible I feel my genius to be. I do not believe my father ever was, or ever could have been, such a poet as I shall be an analyst. Once a translation was published in August 1843 to the critical acclaim of the scientific community, Babbage's reputation was considerably enhanced. Ada sensed this and was encouraged to approach the subject of their future relationship again. In a lengthy letter, she hinted of what she had in mind, a project that seems to have been simmering on the back burner of her brain for a long time. She demanded, "Firstly, I want to know whether if I continue to work on or about your great subject, you will undertake to abide wholly by the subject of myself or of any persons whom you may now please to name as referees whenever we differ. Secondly, can you undertake to give your mind wholly and undividedly as a primary object that no engagement is to interfere with, to the consideration of all these matters which I shall at times require your intellectual assistance and supervision? And can you promise not to slur and hurry things over? Thirdly, if I am able to lay before you in the course of a year or two explicit and honorable propositions for consulting your engine, would there be any chance of you allowing yourself to conduct the business for you, your own undivided energies being devoted to the execution of the work? I wonder," she concluded, "if you will choose to remain the Lady Fairy in your service or not." Still, Babbage seems not to have become suspicious of the nature of her explicit and honorable propositions, and in a letter dated September 9th, 1843, he agreed in effect to go along with whatever she had in mind. She in turn observed, "You're a brave man to give yourself up to fairy guidance." It turned out that her proposal was that the two of them, plus Lord Lovelace, should work together to develop and perfect a system for applying the analytic engine to the problem of beating the odds at horse races. Ever since the day in her early teens when her mother had taken her to the track at Doncaster for the purpose of displaying to her at first hand the evils of horse racing, Ada had developed a love for horse racing. That led to breeding and training horses. She and her husband owned several thoroughbreds and competed in races across England. Ada's love for horse racing extended beyond the thrill of competition. She was deeply interested in the science of breeding and training horses, studying pedigrees and bloodlines to improve the quality of their stable. Her mathematical mind found an outlet in a statistical analysis of racing performance, using data to identify patterns and trends that could inform their training methods. In addition to her practical involvement in horse racing, Ada also wrote extensively about the sport, publishing articles and essays on topics ranging from training techniques to the history of racing. Her writings reflected her passion for the sport and a deep understanding of its complexities, earning her recognition as a knowledgeable and respected authority in the world of racing. Ada Lovelace's adventurous spirit extended beyond the racetrack to the world of gambling, where she was known for her love of risk and excitement. While gambling was frowned upon by polite society, Ada embraced it as a form of entertainment and recreation, finding solace and excitement in the uncertainty of chance. She was drawn to various forms of gambling, including card games, dice, and betting on horses, and applied her sharp intellect and mathematical prowess to analyze the odds and probabilities of different games and strategies. Ada's approach to gambling was methodical and strategic, reflecting her belief in the power of reason and calculation to overcome the unpredictability of chance. Even so, it is astonishing that she should have considered the racing gambler's problem to be well defined enough to yield to computer solution, and incredible that Babbage was attracted to the idea. But by then, he appears to have been completely incapable of saying no to her, a common problem of middle-aged men when dealing with attractive young women. Moreover, in his eyes, the plot offered an incentive to complete the construction of the machine, an opportunity to exercise it on a real problem, and if successful, as a means of raising funds for further development. An unbelievably lurid Victorian melodrama ensued, complete with encoded messages, blackmail, jewel pawning, and unscrupulous bookmakers, culminating in Ada's death. Many of the tales are lost because Babbage, who at her insistence became executor of her estate, seems to have destroyed all direct references to horse racing, both from his and her collected papers, in order to protect the memory of his lady theory. But cryptic messages such as the following are preserved. Ada to Charles. I hope you got Lovelace's package and also a subsequent letter from the birds. The life preserver is safe here. And particularly glad to see you, and it was a particularly good thing as regards the book. The book had become the code word for the system to beat the horses. Although the social world continued, the dinner party at the Charles Dickinsons was the subject of one exchange of letters. Ada's gambling proclivities now dominated their relationship, and wrong steeds persisted in winning. Lord Lovelace contained his losses by withdrawing from the plot at an early date, and he was under the impression that his wife had done the same. However, she was thoroughly in the grip of the gambler's curse, and surreptitiously continued her efforts to perfect the book. Gambling debts piled up, and there's evidence that Babbage himself played the role of intermediary with the bookmakers. Though he may not have fully appreciated her growing desperation, it was not that she gave him no clues. Some very thorough remedial measures must be pursued, she wrote him, or all power of getting any livelihood whatsoever will be at an end. By 1850, she was apparently concealing even from him some of her gambling activities. For he wrote her saying that although he had understood she was planning to spend the weekend at home, I now find that you were at Doncaster on the Triumph of Voltigeur. She was often ill, beginning in early childhood. To add to her woes, Ada's oldest son, an officer in the Royal Navy, deserted and became a premature hippie, living among the poor in London and working at a shipyard. She had a shadowy relationship with one John Cross, who was attempting blackmail on the impoverished and dying Ada. Now in the throes of terminal cancer, she confided to Babbage between bouts of illness that she had twice pawned the Lovelace family jewels and had twice prevailed upon her mother to redeem them. Lady Byron tried desperately to keep her daughter's secret, and when she learned of Lord Lovelace's early complicity in her downfall, she never spoke to him again. Somehow, Babbage escaped her ire. Ada died at age 36, November 1852. A year earlier, she had heard a family acquaintance read some passages of poetry whose beauty enthralled her. She asked the author's name, and the host shrugged in the direction of a portrait of her father. Overwhelmed, she then undertook for the first time the systematic reading of his works. This contributed to a growing alienation from her mother and a turn back to her father. In her will, she asked to be buried beside him in the Byron vault in Hucknall Torquay Church in Nottingham. Babbage, as executor for the estate, used the proceeds of her insurance to buy the incriminating letters from John Cross. In his own will, he bequeathed his lifelong income to Mary Wilson, the serving girl at Ada's bedside during the last months, who had been discharged by Lady Byron because she was learning too many of the family's secrets. In his autobiographical work, Passages from the Life of a Philosopher, Babbage makes only fleeting mention of Countess Lovelace, and then only as a translator of Menabrea's paper. But then he made no mention whatsoever of his wife Georgiana, who gave him 8 children and died at age 35. I'd be remiss not to show you some more pictures. This is a portion of the difference engine. This is a complete one built from Babbage's design. Find it at the London Science Museum. That's a close-up. Here's a portion of the analytical engine with the printing mechanism, and that was built by Babbage. And here are punch cards for programming the machine. And with that, we're done. I hope the questions are not difficult because I've told you about everything I know.